You're not failing, but it feels like you are, doesn't it? Like you're never enough, like you're always falling short trying to handle everything. And still, deep down, something in you is already tired. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why does it feel like I'm always falling behind even though I'm trying so hard? In this video, you're going to understand why this feeling doesn't come from a lack of ability, but from an excess of pressure you've placed on yourself. There's a silent pattern happening inside you. The way you think, the way you push yourself, the way you try to control everything, and it's exhausting you without you even realizing it. And when you begin to see this clearly, something starts to shift. Your mind slows down, the weight begins to lift, and you can finally breathe again. If today you feel overwhelmed, mentally exhausted, or trapped in a pressure that never seems to end, this video will help you reorganize that from within. You won't leave here with more pressure, but with direction. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, with relief. And before we begin, something important. This video was created with the help of artificial intelligence tools, organizing emotional patterns, biblical principles, and real human experiences to bring more clarity to what you're going through. But what truly matters isn't the technology. It's what this can awaken inside you from this moment on. There's a constant feeling inside you that something isn't working the way it should. Even when you try, even when you do your best, even when no one sees how much you're carrying. At the end of the day, there's still that quiet impression that it wasn't enough, like something is always missing, like you're one step behind in life, running to catch something that never quite arrives. And this begins to follow you into everything. Small decisions feel heavy, simple tasks feel bigger than they should, and even moments that could be light are taken over by this sense of insufficiency. You can't just be present, because deep down, there's always something telling you that you should be doing more, being more, giving more. But the real issue isn't what you're doing. It's how you're interpreting all of this. Because the exhaustion you feel, you call failure. The weight you carry, you translate as incapacity. And little by little, that interpretation starts to become your internal truth. Not because it's real, but because it's been repeated so many times inside your mind. You begin to see yourself through a lens that isn't fair, a lens that ignores the effort you've already made, that overlooks the context you're living in, that compares your process to outcomes that are often unrealistic or distorted. And the more you rely on that internal reading, the further you move away from the truth about who you really are and what's actually happening. There's also something subtle happening. Comparisons you no longer even notice. You compare yourself to edited versions of other people's lives, to social expectations, to standards that seem normal, but are impossible to sustain in a healthy way. And without realizing it, you start measuring your life with a standard that was never made for you. The Bible brings a clear principle in Proverbs 3:5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. This reveals something deep. Your understanding, no matter how logical it seems, can be distorting how you see reality. What you feel is not always what is actually true. And when you rely only on that, you begin to build conclusions that weigh you down even more. Maybe you're trying to be responsible, but you've become too hard on yourself. Maybe you're trying to grow, but you're evaluating yourself based on standards God never set for you. And this creates a silent and exhausting cycle. You try, you push yourself, you feel insufficient, and you start again, believing the problem is you. But there's an important difference here. Actually failing is one thing, constantly feeling like a failure is something completely different. And when that feeling becomes constant, the problem is rarely your ability. It's the way you're interpreting your own experience. What if it's not a lack of strength? What if it's not incapacity? What if you're not falling behind, but simply reading your life through a lens distorted by internal pressure? That question begins to open a new space inside you. A space where not everything has to feel heavy all the time. And when that shift begins, something changes within. The circumstances may remain the same, but the way you see yourself in them starts to reorganize. And that alone already reduces part of the weight you've been carrying, because you stop fighting yourself all the time. Because in the end, if the interpretation is wrong, then the weight you're carrying may not be proof of failure, but simply the result of a story that was never true to begin with. And when you begin to question that story, you take the first step toward releasing a weight that may have never truly been yours. There is something inside you that never fully rests. Even when things are under control, even when externally there's no major crisis happening, still, internally, there's this constant sense that you should be doing more, as if stopping is wrong, as if slowing down is dangerous, as if everything might fall apart the moment you relax. And this feeling doesn't show up only in difficult moments. It invades even the moments that should be light. You try to rest, but you can't fully disconnect. You try to enjoy a quiet moment, but your mind keeps running, reminding you of what's still unfinished, what still needs attention, what you could be doing instead. And little by little, this takes away your ability to experience the present with peace. And the most important part is that this doesn't usually come from someone else demanding more from you. It's not an external pressure that is clear, visible, or direct. It's something much more silent. It's an internal voice that has become automatic, a pattern of thought built over time that now runs in the background of your mind, almost like a reflex, a constant sense that whatever you've done is never enough, and that there's always a next level you should be reaching, as if there's a better version of you always waiting, and you're constantly trying to reach it, but never actually arriving. You might complete something important, fulfill a responsibility, solve a problem that seemed difficult, but almost immediately, your mind shifts to the next concern. There's no real moment of satisfaction, no true sense of acknowledgement, because deep down you haven't learned to value what's already been done, only to focus on what's still missing. And this creates a kind of exhaustion that physical rest can't fix. You can sleep, you can pause, you can try to distract yourself, but your mind keeps running, projecting scenarios, anticipating problems, creating endless mental lists. Because the problem isn't the amount of tasks, it's the internal pattern that never allows you to feel at peace with what already is. The Bible brings a simple yet deeply powerful perspective in Ecclesiastes 4-6. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. This directly confronts the way you've been living, because inside you it feels like more is always better. Like doing more, controlling more, achieving more will finally bring peace. But it doesn't. In fact, the more you feed that pattern, the further peace moves away. Because the problem isn't how much you do, it's how you relate to it. You're not just living your life. You're constantly trying to meet an internal expectation that never settles. There's also a quiet phrase repeating inside you: I should be better than I am right now. And at first that may sound motivating, but in reality it creates constant dissatisfaction. Because no matter how much you grow, there will always be a better version you haven't reached yet. And that keeps you from recognizing the real progress you've already made. And over time this begins to affect how you see yourself. Because you're no longer evaluating yourself based on reality, but based on that internal expectation. And inevitably, you will always seem insufficient in comparison to a standard that never stops rising. You begin to live according to a level of demand that never completes itself. And this creates a constant internal tension, a sense of urgency that never fades, a difficulty in simply being present without feeling like something is missing or behind. And the most subtle part of all is that you believe this pressure is necessary, that without it you'll stop, you'll stagnate, you'll lose control. But in reality, this pressure isn't sustaining you. It's wearing you down. It's not taking you further. It's consuming your energy before you even get there. Because there is a difference between responsibility and excessive self-demand. Responsibility organizes, directs, builds. But excessive self-demand pressures accelerates and is never satisfied. And when these two get mixed, you end up living under a weight that feels normal, but was never necessary. And maybe this is one of the most important shifts so far, realizing that what you feel isn't coming from the world around you, but from a pattern that has been built inside you over time. And when you begin to see this more clearly, something changes. Because if the pressure is coming from within, then there is also an internal way to release that weight. But that only begins when you understand something even deeper about the way you've been trying to manage what was never fully in your control. There's a constant tension inside you that's hard to explain, as if you're always trying to keep everything in place, as if you need to predict what could go wrong, anticipate every detail, stay one step ahead of every possible problem. And deep down, it feels like responsibility. It feels like care. It even feels like maturity. But in reality, it's been consuming you from the inside in a quiet and continuous way, because this need for control doesn't show up in an obvious form. It doesn't present itself as control. It disguises itself as constant worry, attention to detail, preparation. It shows up as repetitive thoughts, constant analysis, scenarios you create in your mind, trying to protect yourself from what might happen. You try to anticipate, avoid mistakes, reduce risks, but without realizing it, you start living more in what could go wrong than in what is actually happening right now. And this creates a kind of overload that isn't visible to anyone on the outside. On the outside, you keep functioning. You keep solving, responding, doing what needs to be done. But on the inside, your mind never stops. It keeps running, calculating, trying to hold everything together. And this slowly drains your energy, as if you're carrying an invisible weight all the time. You begin to live in multiple realities at once, the reality of what's actually happening, and several others that only exist in your mind. Situations that haven't happened, problems that may never exist, possibilities you try to anticipate so you can feel more prepared. But in practice, this doesn't prepare you. It only exhausts you before anything even happens. The Bible confronts this pattern directly in Matthew 6:27. Can any one of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? This reveals something essential. Worry doesn't give you real control. It only gives you the feeling that you're doing something. But in reality, it doesn't change the outcome. It only increases the weight you carry and prolongs the tension inside you. There's a very common confusion here between responsibility and absolute control. Being responsible means acting within what is in your reach, doing what can be done today with what you have. But trying to control everything, including what is outside your reach, is taking on a role that was never yours. And the more you try to sustain that level of control, the heavier everything becomes. You begin to feel like you have to make sure everything works out, that nothing falls apart, that no mistakes happen. And this creates an enormous internal pressure, because in reality, that's impossible to sustain. There will always be variables you don't control. There will always be outcomes that don't depend on you. There will always be paths you can't fully predict. And the most subtle part of all is that you start to believe that if you stop worrying, something will go wrong, as if your anxiety is protecting you, as if thinking through every possible scenario is a way to prevent problems. But in reality, it doesn't protect you. It just keeps you in a constant state of alert, as if it's never truly safe to relax. You enter a state of constant vigilance, as if you always have to be on guard. And that prevents you from experiencing real rest. Because rest doesn't come only from stopping physically. It comes from releasing mentally what you cannot control. And as long as that line isn't clear within you, your mind will keep carrying unnecessary weight. And maybe this is the key that begins to reorganize everything, recognizing that there are clear limits between what is your responsibility and what belongs to God. And when that line is blurred, you end up carrying a weight that was never meant for you. A weight that not only exhausts you, but also distorts how you see yourself. Because the exhaustion you feel often doesn't come from what you're actually living, but from what you're trying to sustain mentally all the time. It's the constant effort to guarantee what cannot be guaranteed, to control what was never in your hands. And when you begin to see this, something shifts. You no longer have to try to hold everything together on your own. You can begin to release, little by little, what was never under your control. And in that space that opens up, your mind begins to slow down. If this message is helping you, if you're recognizing yourself in these words, subscribe to the channel, because this space exists for exactly this, to help you understand what's happening inside you with clarity and direction. Because when you change the way you see yourself, you begin to notice something that has always been there, but that you may have never questioned before. There's a version of you in your mind that always seems one step ahead of who you actually are. A version that is more productive, more disciplined, more organized, more balanced, that handles everything, never falls behind, never loses track, never gets tired in the same way. And without realizing it, you've started using that version as the standard to measure your life. That version quietly becomes your internal benchmark. It's not something you openly declare, but it's something you constantly feel. In every decision, every task, every moment of your day, there's a comparison happening. An almost automatic calculation. I should be better. I could have done more. This still isn't where it should be. And little by little, this shapes how you see yourself. The problem is that this version isn't real. It's a mental construction, a combination of accumulated expectations, comparisons with others, past experiences, and even influences you absorbed over time without realizing it. And the more you try to live up to that version, the further you feel from who you actually are today. Because that version doesn't take your context into account. It doesn't consider your fatigue, your current season, your real limitations. It doesn't recognize the invisible effort you make every day. It simply demands. And that constant demand creates deep exhaustion, because you're trying to sustain something that was never meant to be sustained continuously. And this creates a constant internal conflict, because in reality, you're always comparing your life to an expectation that isn't fair. You're not failing in real life. You're failing to reach a standard that was never sustainable to begin with. And that gap, even if it seems small at first, begins to accumulate emotionally over time. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from this. The exhaustion of never feeling enough, even when you've done what needed to be done. The exhaustion of always feeling like you owe something to yourself. And this kind of exhaustion doesn't come from too many tasks. It comes from too much internal demand. The Bible brings an important direction in Galatians 6:4-5. Each one should test their own actions, for each one should carry their own load. This points to something essential. You need to evaluate yourself based on your own reality, your own path, your own timing, not based on an ideal standard that God never set for you. Because when you measure yourself against something that isn't real, you will inevitably feel insufficient. No matter how much you grow, there will always be a distance between who you are and who you think you should be. And that distance becomes a constant source of internal pressure, a pressure you carry every single day without even realizing where it comes from. And little by little, you begin to live trying to close that gap, trying to adjust, correct, speed yourself up all the time, as if you're always behind compared to yourself. And this removes the lightness from the process. It turns growth into weight and progress into constant pressure. There's also a deeper detail here. This ideal version doesn't stay still. It moves. Even as you grow, improve, mature, it adjusts and stays ahead of you, which means you never arrive. You never reach it, because the standard keeps rising as you move forward. And that explains why, even when you make real progress, you don't feel satisfied, because you're not looking at how far you've come. You're looking at what's still missing compared to a standard that never stabilizes, and that completely distorts your perception of your own growth. Over time, you stop living your life and start living in pursuit of that ideal version. And this creates constant tension, a sense that something is always out of place, even when in reality, you are already sustaining many things with effort and responsibility. And maybe this is one of the most important realizations so far. The problem isn't your life. It's the standard you created to measure it. A standard that demands more than you were designed to sustain. A standard that ignores the process and only validates an unreachable ideal. And when you begin to see this, something starts to shift inside you. You no longer need to chase an impossible version of yourself. You can begin to live from who you actually are today, with your limits, your pace, your current season. And this doesn't mean settling. It means aligning. It means growing with awareness, not under pressure. It means evolving while respecting reality, instead of fighting against it all the time. It means allowing growth to be a process, not a constant demand. Because when you stop trying to be a version of yourself that doesn't exist, you create space for something much more real, more stable, and more sustainable, to become who you were truly meant to be. There's a quiet kind of harshness inside you, a way of treating yourself that you may not even notice anymore. It's not something you say out loud, but it's something you feel all the time. A constant pressure, a rigid standard, an internal expectation that never fully relaxes, as if there is always something to adjust, something to improve, something to fix in you. Even when you've done what needed to be done, there is still something inside you pointing to what was missing. What could have been better, what wasn't perfect. And little by little you get used to that inner voice that never fully acknowledges what has already been done. It only points out what still isn't as it should be. And this begins to shape the way you relate to yourself. Because you don't allow yourself to fail lightly. You don't allow yourself to rest without feeling like you should be producing. You don't allow yourself to slow down without carrying guilt. There is always a demand for performance, for control, for consistency, as if you constantly need to prove that you are enough. Over time, this pressure stops being occasional and becomes your emotional pattern. You wake up already feeling like you need to handle everything. You spend the day trying to live up to expectations, and you end the day with the sense that you could have done more. And this cycle repeats itself, with almost no pauses, almost no space for real acknowledgement. And the deepest part of all is that you begin to believe this pressure comes from God, as if He is expecting more from you, as if He is examining every detail, evaluating your performance, waiting for you to reach a certain level before He can be pleased with you. But that is not how God relates to you. The Bible makes this clear in Psalm 103:13-14. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear Him. For He knows how we are formed, He remembers that we are dust. This reveals something essential. God does not ignore your limitations, He does not demand perfection. He deeply understands your process, your pace, your weaknesses. While you demand perfect consistency from yourself, God sees your effort within your reality. While you condemn yourself for every failure, God looks at the path, the intention, the heart. There is a deep difference between the way you judge yourself and the way God sees you. And maybe this is where one of the greatest distortions needs to be corrected. Because you are living under a pressure God never placed on you. You are carrying a standard that did not come from Him. You are trying to meet an expectation that is not part of how He leads your growth. And that changes everything. Because when you begin to realize that God is not pressuring you the way you pressure yourself, something inside you begins to slow down. You no longer need to maintain that inner hardness as if it were necessary for growth. You no longer need to treat yourself with rigidity in order to become someone better. In truth, that rigidity has been pulling you away from what truly transforms. Because the transformation that comes from God does not happen through constant pressure, but through alignment, awareness, and a process that honors who you are and the season you are in. It's not about demanding more. It's about learning to walk in a lighter, steadier, and more conscious way. And that does not mean the absence of responsibility. It means the presence of grace. It means recognizing that you are still being formed, and that this process does not have to be carried with excessive weight all the time. There is room to grow without destroying yourself along the way. Maybe without realizing it, you have become harsher with yourself than God has ever been. Maybe you have adopted a level of pressure that does not reflect the heart of God, but rather an attempt to compensate, to control, to reach something you believe you still need to prove. But you do not need to prove anything. And when that truth begins to become real within you, something changes in the way you treat yourself. The pressure begins to lose strength. The harshness begins to soften. And in its place, something begins to rise that you may not have felt in a long time. Compassion for yourself. And that compassion does not weaken you. It reorganizes you. It brings balance. It creates space. It allows you to keep moving forward without carrying unnecessary weight with every step. Because when you stop demanding more from yourself than is necessary, you begin to have room to grow in a healthier, steadier, more aligned way with what God is actually asking of you. And this prepares the way for an even deeper shift in the way your mind begins to function when that weight starts to lift. There is a quiet moment when something inside you begins to change, not because everything around you has been resolved, but because, internally, the pressure begins to ease. It is not a sudden change, and it does not happen all at once. It is a subtle adjustment, almost unnoticeable at first, but deeply transformative over time. It is as if, little by little, you stop gripping something so tightly, and that alone begins to bring relief to your inner world. When you begin to realize that you do not have to carry everything with the same intensity, Your mind begins to slow down. That constant urgency starts to lose its power. The feeling that everything must be solved right now begins to dissolve. And in its place, a space appears that did not exist before. A space for breathing, for clarity, for presence, where you can simply exist without being in a constant state of alert. This does not mean the problems have disappeared. It means you have stopped amplifying them inside your mind, because much of the weight you were carrying did not come only from reality, but from the way you were reacting to it, from internal pressure, from the need to control, from constant self-demand. And when that begins to decrease, reality itself starts to be seen differently, with more proportion and less emotional intensity. The Bible reveals this principle in a powerful way in 2 Corinthians 12:9. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This completely changes the logic you have been living by, because you no longer have to try to be strong all the time. You do not need to sustain a perfect version of yourself. There is grace available exactly at the point where you acknowledge your limit, not as failure, but as part of your process. And that recognition does not weaken you, it reorganizes you. When you accept that you cannot control everything, when you understand that you do not have to carry everything alone, something inside your mind begins to adjust naturally. Your thoughts stop running in every direction. Your decisions begin to feel simpler. The need to overanalyze starts to fade, and you begin to act with more clarity and less pressure, with more presence in what truly matters. There is a kind of lightness that begins to rise when you stop trying to sustain the impossible. A lightness that does not come from ignoring life, but from aligning yourself with what is real. You are still responsible, still present, still moving forward, but without carrying that constant weight of having to guarantee everything all the time. And that changes the way you position yourself in your own life. And this directly transforms the quality of your mind. Before, much of your exhaustion came from invisible processes, repetitive thoughts, anticipated scenarios, constant attempts at control, silent self-pressure. Now, that begins to decrease. It does not disappear completely, but it loses intensity. It loses frequency. It loses the control it once had over you. And that alone is enough to completely change how you feel throughout the day. And little by little, your mind begins to function in a more organized way. You begin to see more clearly what truly matters and what was only excess. You begin to distinguish what is necessary from what was merely internal pressure disguised as responsibility. And this brings a clarity that once felt impossible to reach. This also begins to affect your decisions, because when you are no longer operating under constant pressure, you stop making choices based on fear, urgency, or the need to prove something. You begin to decide with more awareness, with more balance, with more alignment. Your choices stop being reactive and start becoming more intentional. And maybe one of the most important changes is this: you begin to trust the process more and the need for absolute control less. You begin to understand that not everything has to be solved right now, that not everything depends entirely on you, and that there is a lighter way to move through life when you stop resisting all the time. And at that point, something begins to stabilize inside you. It is not a perfect peace, constant, unshakable, but it is a sufficient peace, a peace that holds you, a peace that allows you to keep walking without being worn down in the same way as before, without carrying that constant emotional weight that used to follow you into everything. Because in the end, you did not lose control of your life. You simply stopped trying to control what was never in your hands. And that is exactly what opens the door to a kind of rest you may not have experienced in a long time. If this message is making sense to you, if you feel like something inside you is beginning to reorganize, subscribe to the channel, because this kind of clarity changes the way you live, and you do not have to go through this alone. And when this weight begins to lift, you begin to notice something even more important. Maybe as you've been watching this video, something inside you has already started to reorganize, not necessarily in your external circumstances, but in the way you're seeing everything now. That constant feeling that you were failing, that you weren't enough, begins to lose its grip when you understand what was really happening underneath it, more clearly and honestly. Because deep down, The problem was never a lack of ability. It was excess pressure. It was trying to sustain a level of control, performance, and responsibility that was never required of you. It was living as if everything depended on you, as if every mistake was proof of incapacity, when in reality, it was just the result of an internal demand that was never healthy. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, you can begin to see yourself with more clarity, not with pressure, but with understanding, not with harshness, but with awareness, realizing that you are not broken, not behind, not lost. You were simply trying to live beyond what you were designed to sustain. The Bible gives a direct invitation in 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on him. This is not just a spiritual phrase. It is a practical, real, and possible direction. It means there is a place where this weight can be placed. It means you don't have to keep carrying everything alone, trying to hold everything together with your own hands, trying to guarantee what was never fully under your control. Maybe you've gotten used to living this way, always tense, always alert, always trying to anticipate everything, fix everything, avoid everything. But this was never the model God established for you. God does not expect constant performance. He expects trust. He does not expect you to carry everything, but to learn little by little to release what does not depend on you. And this release does not happen all at once. It begins in small movements. It begins when you recognize what is too heavy, when you notice what was never in your control, when you allow yourself not to solve everything right now, when you decide, even quietly, to stop carrying what was never yours to sustain. And little by little, this changes everything. Your mind slows down. Your heart feels lighter. The way you see yourself begins to adjust, and life starts to be lived in a lighter, more conscious, more aligned way with what truly matters. You begin to realize that you don't have to live at your limit all the time, that there is space to breathe, that there is space to simply exist without constant pressure. You don't have to prove anything all the time. You don't have to meet an internal expectation that never settles. You don't have to carry all of this on your own. There is a lighter way to live, and it's not far from you. It begins when you change how you position yourself internally, when you stop demanding more from yourself than necessary, and begin to align with what is real, possible, and sustainable. And maybe this is the greatest shift of all. Not doing more, but carrying less. Not forcing yourself more, but aligning better. Not trying to control everything, but trusting more. If this video resonated with you, if in some way you felt this message reached you at the right moment, subscribe to the channel, because this space was created to bring clarity, direction, and peace in moments like this, from the inside out, in a real and practical way. And maybe starting today, you don't need to solve everything. Maybe you just need to recognize what has become too heavy, and in silence, begin to let it go.